Today I want to take a look at how to use PowerShell PNP to create a directory of all sites on the tenant and expand it with attributes from Azure Active Directory. So the use case is that we want to inventory all the sites on the tenant, but we want to add additional properties based on the site owner. So after getting the name of an owner, we want to query Azure Active Directory for department, manager name, extra attributes, and we add those additional columns to the inventory of sites in a flat JSON file. The JSON file ends up in SharePoint Online. So the workflow would be that we have a list of sites in our SharePoint Online tenant. We're downloading that into PowerShell as a way of getting the inventory collection. We then query out to Azure Active Directory for the user, and we query Azure Active Directory for the manager, getting 2 responses from that. And then finally, we take the result of all of it and we put a JSON into a document library. And this is your final artifact that has a listing of all the sites with additional columns from Azure Active Directory. So with that in mind, we'll take a look at the code. And we have a couple of functions here. We'll go ahead and fold them all in, take a look at main, and then we'll run it and check the output. So our main function, very clean, very simple. It really only has a couple of things. It's going to create a table, which is a system.data.data table object here in memory. And why are we doing that? That is a fast cache for filtering the user properties. So the question is, do we already have it, or is it something that we have to add if missing? So the add if missing will actually query Azure Active Directory. And that's a long round trip to go out and collect the data. The other option is that we already have the data in a cache and we can serve it out instantly out of RAM. What this does is it boosts performance. The higher number of sites, the higher number of users. You do not need to repeat the queries to Azure. You already know the responses and they're held in a data table in memory. So that's what we're going to use the table for. Connect clouds, our second function. Go open that up. We're going to make 2 connections. One to SharePoint, one to Azure. The one for SharePoint Online is leveraging a PFX private key certificate. I have a different blog post about how to make those, but it's using a highly secure method to connect to SharePoint Online. The Azure side is using a simple credential, which you can actually store this as an automation credential if you want to host it in a runbook. So there are some ways of avoiding hard coding passwords. Next, we have collect sites, which is going to do a simple get PNP tenant site with a count. And then it's going to go into each one. And in the very beginning here, we're going to try to do find user. And this is our cache in memory. Do we already know the details, or is this the first time we're finding that user? Drilling into the find user function, you'll see that here we can add the data. We've got a hash table of properties, just sort of collecting what things we got out of Azure. And then here are 2 different get commands. And in the 2 different get commands, one of them is for the user and the next one is for manager, because we kind of want some properties from both of those that we're going to be expanding here. And this expand is actually going to the cache in memory. And then the final return set here is 1 row. It will return 1 row. If it's a new user, we go to Azure first and we put it in memory. If it found the user, we just return that 1 row. So in all cases, we get 1 row coming out of our find user function, and it can use caching to avoid round trips, making it perform much faster when you have a high volume of data. So that's collect, that's find user, and then finally, we upload the JSON, which is going to be this last function here. Puts a file into a document library, pretty straightforward. One little trick to note on the collecting of the sites. Here we're actually writing a CSV, and then we immediately read a CSV. Why would you do that? And the reason is to flatten out the object, because a flat object is easier to add members to. It puts us in a position to go ahead and use the add member for expanding the width of the CSV. You want to add extra properties, you want to make it wider, you're not going to be able to do that working directly with the sites collection. So the sites collection, that's more of a rigid schema, right? It's a fixed schema. It's not going to add properties. So what do? You take that input, throw it to CSV text, immediately read it, and now you can add note properties to the CSV results because you're not dealing with a fixed schema anymore. So that's pretty cool stuff. And then down here, we convert it to JSON. So this is how we're actually able to query all the sites in the tenant, add additional properties, and save it as JSON. We'll go ahead and kick the tires and see what the output looks like. Here's a script warming up on the left-hand side. You can see that it connects to two systems. We have both Azure AD and SPO. In green, we have a single add because this was the memory cache for the data table. And then after that, we have 14 found queries. This is where it's using the cache to run faster. In a large environment, thousands of sites, this is going to make a huge difference for performance using the memory cache to look up a user in Azure AD. And at the very ending, we convert and upload JSON. Adding that into the document library is our finish goal. So over here, what we can do is go take a look at the site, and we have our JSON file for output, and come all the way down. And this is only 15 site collections, but we have over 1,000 lines of JSON. So you may want to reduce this in a production environment where you're actually a little more selective about which properties. Right now, these are all of the SharePoint Online properties available. A lot of things in there you don't need, not using. Select statement to narrow it down might be a good idea. But the real gem is down here, where we're bringing in the Azure AD expanded properties, and this is driven by the user and the manager. So we're able to widen the schema, add additional properties about the owner, and use this inventory for other use cases. So you have a JSON file, you've got the inventory. What would you do with it, right? You could use this for a find site directory by keyword. I want to look up a site, search by the name of the owner, the name of the department that person works in, all kinds of cool stuff that you could do with a directory. It also gives you the ability to do restores by URL. You know, what sites did we have on such and such date, right? That's a use case where it may help you with recovery for data. It can help to have ownership for training and governance. You might have like a site owner mandatory training course. This gives you a way of distributing that. The ownership also could be used for people that left the company and you need a replacement owner where you're trying to inventory those things, find sites that are having no owner, or maybe they're owned by the technology team and you want to change that to more of a business owner. So there's a couple different use cases. I think having a JSON file with all of the sites in the tenant is a useful input for a lot of things downstream, and thanks for watching.